Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis. We're continuing to learn halachos Yom Kippurim, and we pick up today on the very bottom line of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph in Siman Tov Reish Yud Beis Sif Ches. Now, to remind ourselves, earlier in Sif Vav, the Mechaber told us Achal achalim she'enam ru'uyim la'achila. If somebody eats foods that are not really edible, somebody eats foods that are not royal la'achila on Yom Kippur. So over there, the Mechaber told us pater, you're pater, which means pater aval aser, you're pater, you're exempt from punishment, you're not chayiv kares, chas v'chalila, but it is aser, there still is an issur d'Rabbanan involved in eating foods that are not royal la'achila. Now, why is it that you're pater for eating foods that are not royal achila? The answer is because, as we've been learning, the issur of achila on Yom Kippurim is based on the pasuk that tells us v'inisem es nafshei sechem. You need to pain yourself. And when it comes to the punishment of kares, the pasuk tells us v'hanefesh asher lo yisu'uneh. The nefesh, the person who does not pain himself, is liable for punishment. When you eat foods that are not royal achila, the nefesh of a person is eino misyasheves bakach. He doesn't become satisfied, he doesn't become settled by eating foods that are not royal achila, and therefore, strictly speaking, you're not over that issur d'oraisa of hanefesh asher lo yisu'uneh. That's what we learned in Siv Vav. Now, here on the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph, we turn to Sif Ches, where the Mechaber tells us, Kus, if somebody chews up, and that's what the Ramah tells us here in the parentheses, Perush, the explanation of the word Kus is, Shekosas, where he chews, Upatza oisam, and he breaks them up and grinds them, Beshinov, with his teeth. So, the Mechaber is telling us, Kus, Pilpale oizang gvila. If somebody chews up hard, dry substances like peppercorns or dried out ginger. Now, these are things that it's not the derech to eat this way. It's not the derech to take peppercorns and chew them up. It's not the derech to take hard wood-like ginger and just chew it up plain. So if somebody would do that, now the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us here that when the Mechaber speaks about somebody who chews up peppercorns or ginger, he does not mean somebody who chews them up and then spits them out without eating them. No, the Mechaber is speaking here about somebody who chews them up and swallows them. So why doesn't the Mechaber just say ha'oichel pilpalei oizang vila, somebody who eats peppercorns or ginger? So for that, the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us, since it's not the derech to eat hard, dry things like plain peppercorns or ginger, it's not called achila. It's called kus. That's what that's called. It's called somebody who chews up peppercorns. It's not called somebody who eats peppercorns, because that's not a method of achila. You don't eat peppercorns. So now, says the Mechaber, kus pilpalei oizang vila, if somebody chews up peppercorns or ginger and swallows it, says the Mechaber, imheim yeveshim, if they're dry, so this is mamish not the derech of achila, pater, then he's exempt. And again, it means pater aval aser. He's exempt from punishment. He's not going to be chayiv kares for eating on Yom Kippur, but this is an issur d'Rabbanan. Pater, he's exempt from punishment. Why? Because just like we learned in Siv Vav, if you eat something that's not royal achila, you're pater. This is considered eating something and in a way that is not royal achila. However, continues the Mechaber, ve'imheim retuvim, if they're moist, then chayiv, then you are chayiv for eating on Yom Kippur, because if the peppercorns or the ginger are moist, then it is the derech to eat them, and then that's a fully normal achila, and you would be chayiv for that. Says the Mishnah Berurah back at Ayin Vav Amud Aleph near the bottom, Chav Beis, Kas. We said, the Ramah said, Pirish Shekosas. The explanation of the word kas is that he chews it up. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Umayri Shebela'am. Like I explained to you, the Mechaber certainly is talking about a case here where not only did he chew them up, but he chewed them up and he swallowed them. The ilavachi, because if we're not speaking about a case where he swallowed them, afilu retuvim pater. If he didn't swallow the peppercorns or the ginger, then even if they would be moist, The halacha would not be what the Mechaber says on Ayin Vav Amud Beis, where if they're moist, he's chayiv. You can't be chayiv kares for just chewing up peppercorns if you didn't swallow them. So obviously the Mechaber is speaking about a case where you did swallow them. And yet, if they're dry, you're still potter, meaning potter aval aser, because since it's not the derech achila, so you're not chayiv. And again, the reason you're not chayiv, not just because it's not the derech achila, that you don't eat peppercorns in that fashion. It's an achila she'ena ru'uya, and therefore ein nafshe shel adam misyasheves bekach, and that wouldn't be v'hanefesh asher lo yisu'uneh. Okay. Continues the Chavetz Chaim here. Ukira'am b'shein kesisa. The Mechaber uses the word kas, and he calls this kesisa without calling it achila. Mishum de pilpel yavesh oizangvil, because dried peppercorns or ginger shekairin ingeber hu davar she'ein darkon lechol. It's not the way to eat these things. You don't eat dried peppercorns. V'lachein potter, and therefore you're potter. And now the Chavetz Chaim tells me, v'chol potter to itmar hacha. We should remember that whenever we use the word potter in the context of these halachos, potter aval aser. It means potter, you're exempt from punishment, but there still is an issa d'Rabbanan. If we take a look at Dirshu footnote number 31, he does point out that this that we say that you're potter, that you're exempt from punishment, should you eat the peppercorns or the ginger, because it's not the derech to eat, ein darkon lechol, it's not the way to eat them this way. He writes here in the footnote, V'hainu davka kisha achlam b'fnei atzmam. This is only true if you ate the peppercorns or the ginger plain on their own. Avalam achalam im sukar uchedaima. But if you added sugar or something to it and you ate it that way, hispar le'el siman reish beis if katnayin tes l'in berchas hanenin sha'aderchi la'ochlam kach. Earlier in Siman Reish Beis, we learned that to eat peppercorns together with other flavorings like sugar, that would be a derech achila, and therefore you would have to make a bracha rishona when you ate it, and so too on Yom Kippur, if you ate it with sugar, that would be a normal achila, or at least a somewhat normal achila, and then you would taka b'chayiv kares chas v'chalila. Okay, now we go to Sif Tes, top line, Ayin Vav Amud Beis. The same way we learned that somebody who eats on Yom Kippur, in order for him to be chayiv, he has to eat a certain minimal amount of food. The same holds true by drinking. If somebody drinks on Yom Kippur, in order to be chayiv, he would have to drink at least a minimal amount of liquid. What is that amount? Says the Mechaber in Sif Tes. Hashoyse b'Yom Kippur, if somebody drinks on Yom Kippur, Meloi lugmav. What's a Meloi lugmav? Says the Rabbah in the parentheses, Pirish Meloi piv. If somebody drinks a mouthful, chayiv, then he is chayiv. How do we measure a mouthful? Says the Mechaber, Umisha'arim b'chol adam lefi ma'shehu. When it comes to the measurement of a mouthful, now it's going to depend on the size of the person. Hagadol lefi gadloi, somebody who is physically large, so his mouth is larger and his mouthful is larger. Va'katan lefi katanai, and when it comes to a physically small, a diminutive person, so then his mouthful is going to be less liquid. So this stands in contrast to what we learned by foods. By foods we learned that what is the minimum share? A kaiseves hagasa. In order to be chayiv kares on Yom Kippur for eating, you have to eat at least a volume of food equal to a large date. And over there the Mechaber taught us that this share applies equally to large people or to small people. Why? Because the Chazal established that a person becomes satisfied by eating that volume of food. And it doesn't matter if he's a large person or a small person. Even a very large person gets a certain amount of satisfaction by eating a volume of food equal to a kaiseves hagasa. That's by food. By drink, the Mechaber is telling us over here, that's dependent on the size of the person. Each person becomes satisfied by drinking a volume of liquid equal to their own mouthful. And therefore, a larger person has to drink more, and a smaller person has to drink less. So again, the Mechaber said here, we're going to measure the minimal amount of liquid a person needs to drink in order to be chayiv, based on the individual size of that person. Hagadol, a large person, lefi gadloi, in accordance with his large size. Va'katan, and a small person, lefi katnai, in accordance with his diminutive size. V'loy meloy lugmav mamish. Now the Mechaber says, when I told you that the minimum share is a mouthful, I don't mean literally a mouthful. Ella, rather, how much? Kedei sheyisalkenu l'tzad echad, enough liquid that if you would push it to one side of your mouth, v'yeira'eh kimaloi lugmav, and his cheek would pop out, because he pushed all that liquid to one side, so that now his mouth looks like it's full. And in regular measurement terms, the Mechaber says, "V'hu pachas miravius ba'adam beinani." And when we're talking about an average sized person, says the Mechaber, we're talking about an amount of liquid that is slightly less than a revius. V'chal hamashkim mitztarfim l'shir. And all beverages, all liquids would combine to make up this minimal amount. So if you had water and mixed with orange juice and mixed with seltzer, all of those liquids are going to add up to form this minimal volume of liquid to be chayiv on Yom Kippur. It doesn't have to be one type of liquid alone. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Chav Gimel, Maloi Lugmav. The Mechaber said that the shear is a mouthful. Why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, to Kimluhu l'Rabbanan, because the Chazal established the B'shir Zeh, that with this amount of liquid, Misyayishev Daitoi Shal Adam, a person's mind becomes settled and he becomes satisfied that he needed a drink and he got a drink. Va'azal Mimenu Inui, and now he's no longer suffering. By each person we judge based on their physical size. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ritzaino Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say over here is, the kan, over here when we're speaking about liquids, Ein Asher Shava L'chal Adam, K'moi Ba'achilo B'sif Aleph. When it comes to drinking liquids, the minimal amount that you need to consume is not the same by every person, the way it is when it comes to food. By food, no matter how large you are or how small you are, you have to eat a kikaiseves hagasa. You have to eat a volume of food equal to the size of a large date. But by liquid, it's dependent upon the size of the person. Why? Continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, Mishum, the reason for this is the le'inyan shtia, that when it comes to drinking, kimlu l'chachamim, the chachamim were able to know the loy misyasva daitei shal adam, that a person's mind is not settled, ella b'meloy lugmav didei, only if he drinks a mouthful. It has to be his own mouthful. I'm going to step away from the camera just for 1 second over here because I see that my laptop battery is running low. And I just want to quickly plug it in. Please bear with me. Give me 1 second here. Okay, my apologies for the interruption. All right, where were we? Okay. So that's why when it comes to drinking, it's dependent on the size of the person. Now, if we take a look in the Dirshu, footnote number 35, very interesting shiloh that they speak about here in this footnote. I got a kick out of it. So he says over here, V'noizlim shenikrishu b'miktsas. How about flowing liquids that are somewhat frozen? Kigoin shamenes uglida, like ice cream. Shamenes, I'm not sure what shamenes means in modern day Ivrit. Histapek Agoin Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal was mesupik. He had questioned, Ha'im nechashavim heim k'meichel. Are these types of foods considered a food? Is it considered a solid food? And therefore, v'shiyuram b'kreiseves b'ktei achilas pras. And therefore, in order to be chayev for eating ice cream, let's say, on Yom Kippur, somebody would have to eat a volume of ice cream equal to that of a large date, and he would have to eat it within a kedei achilas pras. Oy kemashke, or do we treat it like a drink? V'shiyuram kimale lugmov b'kedei shtias revius. And then the shear is a mouthful, and you would have to drink it in the amount of time it takes a normal person to drink a revius of liquid. Very interesting question. How do you look at ice cream? Is it a solid food, or is it a drink? Ubir, and Rosh Shlomo Zalman explained, even though you don't chew these foods, and therefore you would think maybe it's more pashut to treat it as a drink, nevertheless, Yitachin, it's possible, in Yom Kippur, that in the context of the halachos of Yom Kippur, we have been saying all along that when it comes to Yom Kippur, the bar is, what does it take to satisfy a person? What does it take to take away the inui? So maybe Rosh Shlomo Zalman says, Tzuras ha'achila noisenes lahem shem meichel. Maybe the method by which you eat the food, that's how we gauge whether or not somebody is going to become satisfied with a certain amount of food. So, according to this footnote, I didn't see it inside by Rosh Shlomo Zalman, but Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, seems to be saying over here is that, on the one hand, it would seem more reasonable to treat something like ice cream as a liquid, because you don't bite it and chew it and swallow it. It's more of a type of drink the way you eat it. But how do you eat the ice cream? So you have ice cream in a bowl, you take a spoon, you dip it in, and you eat it from a spoon. You don't go like this and drink it. And maybe the question of whether or not it's going to take away the inui, maybe that has something to do with the method with which you eat it. So suggests from Shlomo Zalman. Continue is here in the footnote. V'das hagoyin Rabbi Yosef Shalom al Yashiv Zatzal le'inyan noizol shenikrash, when it comes to something like ices. Shetoli adovar, it's dependent upon ha'im maknisoi lepiv derech mitzitza. Do you take it? Do you eat it by sucking it? Shezen nechshav kemashke. Then you would have to treat it as a drink. V'shiyurei kemali lugmav. Avalim loyasai. But if you chew it, nechshav kemichael, then it becomes a michael. V'shiyurei b'koiseves. V'das hagoyin Reb Nisa Karelitz, also Zatzal, sha'adavar toli b'delilos hadavar. Reb Nisa Karelitz wanted to suggest that it depends how liquefied it is. Well, lefikach, something like leben, shehu dalil, which is very liquidy, dinai kemashke, that's a beverage. I see a lot of kids eat leben with a straw. Masha ain't kein gvina, but something like cheese, kevin shehi ain't a dalila, it's not loose, dina kamichael, that would be considered a michael. So it's just a very interesting concept over here, a very interesting question. How do you treat frozen foods? Do you treat them like drinks, or do you treat them like foods? Okay. Eis Kotnachav Hey, Mishnah Berurah says, V'loi maloi lugmav mamish. When we said that the minimum share of a beverage to be chayav and Yom Kippur is a maloi lugmav, is a mouthful, the Mechaber said not literally a mouthful. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ritzayna Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, we don't mean mamish a mouthful, so that you look at a person and he's like this. His whole mouth is mamish full, and that's what's called a malay lugma. Ella, rather, says the Chavetz Chaim, dai, it's enough, and he brings this down for the Pirush HaMishnah la Rambam, Pirush Mishnayos la Rambam, Ella dai, sheyehei echad malay ubaylet. It's enough if one side, one cheek, is filled up and bubbling out. I think what the Mishnah Berurah means, literally the words mean, she'oz, then, if one side of his mouth, if one cheek is full, then yera memela, then memela it looks like ki'ilu shteim malayim, as if both cheeks are full. I hope I'm understanding the Mishnah Berurah correctly. I think what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is that if on one side the cheek is full and is popping out, then a person who sees this person understands that his mouth must be full. That's called that his mouth is overfull. Why is one cheek bursting like that? Because his mouth is already overfull. But certainly the other side is also full. But it doesn't need to be that the other side is also popping out, because then his mouth is stuffed. It's not just full. Eis katan chavav. V'hu pachas meravius. The Mechaber told us, if you want to know in measurement terms how much liquid we're talking about a little bit less than a revius. Says the Chafetz Chaim, mashma, the implication of the words of the Mechaber, when the Mechaber says we're talking about pachos me revius, less than a revius, the implication is tehu karev l'revius. It sounds like close to a revius, but less than a revius. If it's not close to a revius, then the Mechaber wouldn't have said less than a revius. Omnam, however, b'siman reisha in aleph sif yud gimel kasav, over there the Mechaber writes tehu rubai shel revius, that it's not really close to a revius. It's a majority of a revius. It's 51%, but it's not 98%. Vayin b'Berurah halacha sham, where the Berurah halacha discusses this discrepancy in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mechaber said that this is the shear when it comes to an Adam Beinani, to an average person. However, points out the Chafetz Chaim, as the Mechaber said, it depends on the physical size of the person involved. Sometimes sometimes a person's individual malay lugma will be a revius or even more than a revius, by an exceptionally large person. Or lahefech, and the opposite, ba'adam katan, you could have a very small person, the malay lugma of didei who pachas me roi revius. By him, a malay lugma might be even less than a roi revius. And gam kein chayiv, and yet he'll be chayiv, because that's his malay lugma. Kevan de milyasev daita al yidei, because as we said, the whole point of this shear is because that's what it takes to satisfy a person to take off the inui as a malay lugma. So whatever his size is, whatever his personal malay lugma is, that's what's going to make him chayiv. Okay. Now the Mechaber said over here, v'chala mashkim mitztarfim l'kashir, that all different types of beverages combine to get together and make up this minimum shear. Now says the Ramah Hagah, Shasa mashkim she'einon ru'uyin lishtia. What happens if somebody drinks something which is not potable? Somebody drinks a liquid which is not really roi la'achila. So as we started off this year, we said that if somebody eats foods that are not roi la'achila, pater avalaser. What happens if you drink liquids that are not roi la'achila, they're not roi lishtia? Kigoyin, for example, says the Ramah, tzir, fish brine, a murias, or another type of fish brine, and we'll define what the difference between tzir and murias is in the Mishnah Berurah. V'chaimitz chai, or very raw and strong vinegar, pater. You would be pater. That would be pater avalaser. So the same way it's pater avalaser to eat foods that are not roi la'achila on Yom Kippur, the halacha is also pater avalaser to drink liquids that are not roi la'achila on Yom Kippur. Aval, however, continues the Ramah, he says, chaimitz mazug, diluted vinegar, chayiv, for that you could be chayiv for drinking that on Yom Kippur. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois katan chavches, kigoin tzir. His example of a liquid that's not roi la'achila is fish brine. Says the Chafetz Chaim, hu ma sheshoiseis min hadog, kisheshorin oisoi bemelach. Tzir is the brine, the liquid that gets drawn out of the fish when you salt fish. When you salt fish, why is salt a preservative? Because salt draws out the liquids from the item that you're salting. So when you salt fish, there's a liquid that exudes. That's what's called tzir. Murias, what's murias? Hu shuman hayoytze min adagim. That's some kind of an oil that is exuded from fish. Eis katan chavtes v'chaimitz chai, raw strong vinegar. Says the Chafetz Chaim, v'dafka shemiva'abeya, we're talking about chaimitz vinegar that's so strong that it bubbles. Kishem ashlichan oisai al haaretz. If you pour it down on the ground, you're going to see it bubbling. That's what we're referring to when we talk about Chometz Chai, that's not Roy L'Shtia. Da'az ain't a Roy L'Shtia, upater, and therefore you would be exempt for drinking it, afilu shasa harbe yoiser mikashir. Even if you drank a gallon of it. A gallon is certainly more than a Malay Lugmav. But even if you drank a gallon of this Chometz Chai that bubbles on the ground on Yom Kippur, you're still pater because it's not Roy L'Shtia. The kevachu Chometz Chazak, because since this is very strong vinegar, this Chometz Chai, Tfei mazikoi, this will actually harm a person who drinks it. However, the Chavetz Chaim brings down another opinion here, and he says, V'yeshayimrim, there are those that say, and he brings this down from the Rabbeinu Yerucham and the Rabbeinu Yoina, V'yeshayimrim, there are those that say, Tekesheshoisa harbe, if somebody would drink really an excessive amount, even of Chometz Chai, which is not royal L'Shtia, Chayiv, in that case he would actually be liable. He would be Chayiv Karis. Why? Mishum da'oz shoiver ra'avoinoi, because by drinking that much liquid, even if it's a liquid that is simply not royal L'Shtia, still shoiver ra'avoinoi, it will break his hunger. The bottom line is he has filled up his digestive tract with a very large amount of liquid, and that's going to break his hunger. And then he fulfills the pasuk. He did something to take off the inui, so now he's going to be chayiv. Aval aser lekule alma afilu beporta. But says the Chavetz Chaim, remember, while we're questioning over here what the halacha would be if somebody drinks a large amount of Chometz Chai, is it to be chayiv or not? The whole argument is only whether or not he's going to be chayiv. Even the shita that holds that he's not chayiv, it's still aser. The halacha still is pater aval aser. Okay. Now we go to Sif Yud. Says the Mechaber, Shasa ma'at v'chazar v'shasa. What happens if somebody drinks a small amount of liquid, less than the share, less than a malay lugmai, and then he drinks again? Two separate acts of drinking. Im yesh b'tchila shtia rishayna atzav shtia achrayna kedei shtias revius. If the amount of time that elapses from the beginning of his first act of drinking to the end of his second act of drinking is the amount of time that it takes a normal person to drink a revius of liquid, then mitzdarfen likashir, then it's all considered one drink. So you take a drink, and then you pause a little bit, and you start drinking again. But the amount of time within which you swallowed both drinks is the amount of time that it takes a normal person to drink a revius of liquid, then it's all considered one act of drinking. It's one drink, and mitzdarfen likashir, and therefore all of that volume of liquid that you drank in the two drinks will combine to make up the minimal share to be chayiv. V'em lav. But if you didn't drink it within that amount of time, if more time passed over the course of all of this drinking, if more than kedei shtias revius passed, ein mitzdarfen, then it's viewed as two separate acts of drinking, and they do not combine to make up the minimal share. However, says the Mechaber, there are those that say sheshir tziraf hashtius, that the amount of time that can elapse, and you could still be able to combine the two acts of drinking into one to consider it one drink, is kedei achilas pras. It's much longer than a kedei shtias revius. How long is a kedei shtias revius? The amount of time it takes a normal person to drink a revius, maybe approximately 4 ounces of liquid. That's not a lot of time. So are those that say no, that's not the shear. You know what the shear is? The same shear that we have by achila. By achila, we said, in order for all the eating to be combined as one act of eating, you have to eat it in the amount of time of kedei achilas pras. That's longer than kedei shtias revius, and some people assign the shear of kedei achilas pras to drinking as well. K'may tziraf achilas. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there are those that take a more machmedic approach, and they say that as long as you drank the two drinks within a kedei achilas process, considered one drink. Miloshan HaMechaber, from the language of the Mechaber, mashbeit is implied to ha'ikar kedei aleph, that the ikar dea over here, the ikar opinion, is the first opinion. right? Because the Mechaber says that's the din. The din is if you waited longer than Kedei Shtiyas Revius, it's not mitzdarf. The Yesh Omrim, and there are those that say, so it sounds like the Iker is the first opinion. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, Avala Pri Chadash v'Hagra Kasfu, the Pri Chadash and the Gra, right? The Iker Kedei Hashniya, that in actuality, the main opinion is the second opinion. Says the Rama, Haga, Mutter Liga B'Yom Kippur Ba'achlin U'Mashkin V'Lite Lektanim. You're allowed to physically touch foods and drinks on Yom Kippur, and you're allowed to give them to a child to eat. V'loi chayshinan, and we are not concerned, sheyoichal oyishte im yiga. We don't make a gzera. We don't say that you're not allowed to touch food or drink on Yom Kippur lest you come to eat it or drink it. No, you're allowed to touch it. You're allowed to pick up the cream cheese sandwich, and you're allowed to give it to your kid who's not fasting, who's underage. You're allowed to give it to him to eat it. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Lamed Beis, V'loi Chayshinan, and we're not concerned that you might come to eat it. Says the Chavetz Chaim, we have a very interesting discrepancy between this halacha and another halacha that we learned previously. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'loi Dami L'chametz B'Pesach, and we do not compare the halacha over here of food and drink on Yom Kippur to the halacha that we learned in Hilchas Pesach when it comes to chametz on Pesach. Over there we said that on Pesach you don't touch chametz. Why? Because we're afraid that if you touch chametz on Pesach you might come to eat it. But on Yom Kippur we don't say don't touch food, because if you touch food you might come to eat it. Says the Chavetz Chaim, why is this? This halacha is not the same as the halacha of chametz on Pesach, because by Pesach you are prohibited to touch chametz because you might come to eat it. What's the difference between these two halachas, says the Chavetz Chaim? Because we have to remember there's a great difference between Pesach and Yom Kippur. On Pesach you're allowed to eat. So on Pesach you're eating your matzah brai, and you're eating your if you brok, of course, you're eating your matzah brai, you're eating all sorts of other Pesach foods, so you are sitting by the table and eating. And therefore we're afraid that if you handle chametz, you might come to eat chametz. So since on Pesach you can eat other foods, that's why we have to worry that if you touch chametz, you might come to eat the chametz. But this is different than Yom Kippur. The badal mikol davar achil ushtia. Because on Yom Kippur you're not allowed to eat and you're not allowed to drink, and therefore we're not afraid that you're going to forget yourself and you're going to eat it. Again, on Pesach I'm allowed to eat the matzah, I'm allowed to eat the potato chips, I'm allowed to eat, there's a lot of food that I'm allowed to eat. So if somewhere I stumble onto chametz, I might eat the chametz. Therefore we say you're not allowed to touch the chametz. But on Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat at all. So we're not worried that you're going to come to eat food. And furthermore, says the Chavetz Chaim, there's another reason why we're not afraid that you're going to come to eat on Yom Kippur, and that is the Emas Yom Hadin Olav, because it's Yom Hadin Ayom V'Noira, and somebody has the Emas Hadin on his mind, he's certainly not going to come to eat chametz. Lakach loy chayshinan sheyishkach, we're not afraid he's going to forget. Even if a child could pick up the food and eat the food on his own, so really there's no need for you to give the kid the food on Yom Kippur. There's still no reason to be machmir, and you are allowed to touch the eggs, and you are allowed the eggs. What am I saying? There's no reason to be machmir. Even if the kids could take the food by themselves, there's no reason to be machmir. You are allowed to touch the food on Yom Kippur, and you're allowed to serve it to the children. And we don't make a gzera. We don't say that we're afraid if you touch the food, you might come to eat the food. Now, there's another thing at play here when we speak about the question whether or not you're allowed to touch food on Yom Kippur or on Pesach. On Pesach, there's another reason why food, you're not allowed to touch chametz, especially on Yom Tov on Pesach, is because it's muktzah. It has absolutely no use. The food is aser ba'ana. Chametz is aser ba'ana on Pesach. So on the days of Yom Tov of Pesach, another reason why you're not allowed to touch the food is because the food is muktzah. But food is not muktzah on Yom Kippur. The reason food is not muktzah on Yom Kippur is because you have a use for it. You could give it to a child who's hungry, and therefore it's not muktzah. Okay, let's start Siman Tafrei Shud Gimel. Says the Mechaber, also lirchaitz b'yom Kippurim, you're not allowed to bathe or to wash yourself on Yom Kippur, bein b'chamin, whether with hot water, bein b'tzainin, whether with cold water. Va'afilu lahishet etzbai b'mayim aser, you're not even allowed to dip your finger into water. However, if somebody's hands or feet or the rest of his body is dirty with some kind of filth, either with tit, with mud, or excrement, or let's say somebody has a nosebleed and he got blood on him, so he wants to wash himself, then you're allowed to wash. Because the Chazal only aser rechitza shal tainug, only washing that involves pleasure and enjoyment, and therefore it's a violation of a hanefesh shaloise une if you go ahead and you do that kind of washing on Yom Kippur. But if you push it filthy and you have to wash the filth off your hands, that's not a rechitza shal tainug, so that's okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut aleph mutter l'rachtzam. If your hands or feet or the rest of your body became dirty with some kind of filth, then you're allowed to wash them. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, you have to take care. You have to make sure that you only wash off the part of the body that's actually dirty. And here's an interesting chiddush that the Chavetz Chaim says. Let's say a person got dirty all over his body. Or not mamish all over head to toe, but in a bunch of places on his body he got dirt on himself. And now he has a situation where he has dirt here, he has dirt here, he has dirt here, he has dirt here, dirt here, dirt here. And what are you going to make him do? You're going to tell him he could wash off each individual spot that got dirty. So he's going to be there for hours on Yom Kippur, taking a Q-tip and getting off each dirty spot. In that case, says the Chavetz Chaim, and it'll be too much of a tircha for him to wash off every individual spot. Such a person would be allowed to go jump into the pool or into a shower or into a bath and dunk his whole body at one time in order to take the dirt off of himself. But, says the Chavetz Chaim, you should know, when somebody is washing himself on Yom Kippur to remove dirt, which we're saying is mutter, he should have in mind that he's not washing himself to get any hana. He's not washing himself for the pleasure and for the benefit of watching. Rak lahav alichlach, and he's only doing this to wash the filth off of himself. So it's important, if somebody has a situation where he is allowed to wash because of dirt, he should remember to have in mind, not, that feels so good. No, he should have in mind, I'm only doing this to take the dirt off. And continues the Chavetz Chaim in his cotton base. Why is this mutter? Because the Chazal only answered when they answered rechitza, when they answered washing, they only answered a rechitza shel tainug, a washing that has to do with enjoyment. Milosh is there from this language. Mashmid is implied. Dim hazeh harbe, that if it's a very, very hot Yom Kippur this year, B'ez Hashem, will be very early. And if it'll be very hot, the way the rest of the summer has been so far, so a person, if the air conditioning Chas v'Chalila is not working, a person is going to get very hot and sweat it up. Now, from this Mechaber, where the Mechaber says that the only rechitza that's also is a rechitza shal tainug, a rechitza for enjoyment, mashma It's implied, says the Chavetz Chaim, if somebody's just very sweated up, and he wants to wash not for pleasure, but just to get the sweat off of himself. Mutter, it sounds like it's mutter, because that's not a washing of tainug, of enjoyment. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, if somebody's not an istanis, if somebody's not a very delicate, fine person, he doesn't need it so badly, it would be proper to rule stringently not to wash in order to remove the sweat. The same way we saw that you're not allowed to anoint yourself with fragrant oil to take away an odor. Okay, we'll stop here on the top line of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph by Sif Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Berurah should send Yeshua's for and Parnassus to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the Bias Kol Tzedek b'Meher v'Yameinu. Amen.